Ladies and gentlemen, it may be time to have a little bit of panic about this Philadelphia Phillies team. Following an 18-3 blowout loss to the A's and then dropping 2 games to the Pittsburgh Pirates and then a bad 7-2 loss against the Twins in which they're straight up just playing bad baseball right now, my panic meter has risen above zero for really the first time all season. Now, this is not to say that this Phillies team is still the real deal. They're absolutely still World Series threats and could get things together, but we are finally starting to see the clear points in which this team may have some issues. Now, on the positive side of things, this is happening at the right time. We are just under a week until the MLB trade deadline, and the Phillies have to get something done to improve this team and upgrade their chances as great as possible. You never know how narrow that window is or how long it can stay open to truly pursue a World Series, and it would be a massive mistake if the Phillies do not take every action possible to give themselves the best chance. Well, luckily, we got some news as the Phillies were recently put out a report connecting them to a familiar face, so I want to dive exactly into that and discuss things. And I'm going to start out with the title of this article from Bernie Pleskoff right here, who writes that the Philadelphia Phillies need a center field upgrade at the MLB trade deadline. Now, this has been a common talked about position. We know kind of the positional battle that's going on, the concerns with Johan Rojas' bat, as well as a number of the platoons, whether it be Brandon Marsh, Christian Pache, or everything else that kind of has been rotated through to try and make this work. There also was pretty much dismissed in the article why they don't need any help with the pitching staff. I wouldn't dismiss that as much as was the case in this article, but I do want to hear him out on his case for center field, as well as the Luis Robert Jr. news that he kind of dropped in here. So I'm going to start things out and talk a little bit about what he wrote in this article. Let's begin by diving into exactly what was said. And the first thing that he writes when discussing this article is he does write that about the current options in center field. So currently, here are the batting averages of the current Phillies outfielders as of July 22nd. There's Brandon Marsh, who's hitting .259, which is solid. And when you think back to it, Marsh initially coming to Philly, it did seem like the plan was for him to take care of that center field spot. Ultimately, after he was traded from the Angels out there, it kind of turned out his bat was better than expected and his glove was worse. And ultimately, that kind of contributed to each of these problems. And that's sort of the decision that the Phillies continue to battle on. That Brandon Marsh or Johan Rojas or each of these guys, they've essentially having to make the decision between whether you want a glove guy or a bat guy. And that ultimately is not what wins you a World Series. Now, the other options, there's Johan Rojas, who's hitting .232. There's Nick Castellanos, who's hitting .239, which is down significantly from last season, although he has shined in other areas, and I just dropped a video kind of speaking about the streakiness about him. There's Christian Pache at .202, which is absolutely unacceptable, and he just simply, Pache, I think if you're playing him in any serious minutes in the playoffs, there's some real problem with this Phillies team, which is a large reason why we're having this conversation. And Weston Wilson getting another chance at .278, only 30 plate appearances. We did see them DFA Whit Merrifield, move on from him, and ultimately give Weston Wilson another chance here. There's a lot of guys in the mix, but ultimately it makes the argument that there is only one option for this Phillies team, and that is to go for Luis Robert Jr. So he writes about Luis Robert Jr. and diving specifically that the Chicago White Sox center fielder bats right. He's 26 years old, 6'2", 230. Currently on a losing White Sox team, Robert Jr. could be an ideal fit for this Phillies team. Entering his prime, Robert Jr. is an incredible athlete with power and speed, a potentially lethal combination. Injury prone, Robert Jr. missed time in most seasons with nagging injuries, including a right hip flexor, a hand injury, a thumb injury, and more. Keeping him healthy has been a challenge, but when he is healthy, Robert Jr. can change a game with one swing of his bat. An All-Star in 2023, Robert hit 36 doubles, a triple, and 38 home runs, while driving in 80 home runs and 595 plate appearances. His batting average has fallen this year from .264 last season to .232 currently. A very good defensive outfielder, Robert Jr. would be a huge upgrade for Philadelphia. So a lot to digest there, but the bottom line is this guy is straight up a better baseball player than any of the options the Phillies have, even though there is that caveat with the injuries. And to dive a little bit more in what he brings from a statistical standpoint, let's take a look at his stats on the year. So 11 home runs and 23 RBIs in 177 at-bats. He's got a .306 on-base percentage with 19 walks and 41 hits. Also 12 stolen bases on the season and a slugging percentage of .475. The fact that he's still 26 years old has changed my opinion on this a great deal, because when you do think about it, this is a guy that could be a long-term part of this Phillies core, and at 26, there's still plenty of years for him to grow into it. He even fits a little bit of the timeline when you think about the Bryson Stotts and Alec Boehms, although we may have to have a conversation about Bryson Stotts' production a little bit soon, as he has not taken those next strides, although Alec Boehm has more than made up for that, as this guy has ascended to levels that I didn't truly think he was capable of this season. So in regards to that, we will get into that for another day. But poor Robert Jr., I did want to touch a little more on it. So let's dive into kind of a little bit of my concern with this potential trade here. So to switch gears and move over here, let's shift this around. And this is the thing that panicked me on a potential trade here. So we got this news from John Stellanis here, who says that the White Sox reportedly want a Juan Soto-like haul for Luis Robert Jr. That's nuts. But what should they give up for a 26-year-old signed through 2027? And that being the largest difference here is there's still a lot of contractual team control, which is slightly different than the Soto situation here. But to acknowledge exactly what was in return for Soto, we're talking about a pitcher, Michael King, a pitcher in Johnny Brito, a catcher in Kyle Higashikota, as I believe how you say that, as well as 2 prospects there. And then written below is perhaps most importantly, one of the fundamental goals of moving Soto was securing the financial relief from his contract, giving San Diego more flexibility to move its team, to build its team moving forward. They achieved that in 2024, but also cashed out on some assets for Soto before he had a chance to walk for nothing in free agency. So that being the largest difference there, that Soto was a guy that we kind of knew the writing was on the wall for him leaving, so the team cashing out. Now, the biggest difference in my mind is Luis Robert Jr. is not Juan Soto. He's a very good baseball player, but he's not quite in that stratosphere, nor do I honestly think he can ever ascend to that. Now, to give a little bit of optimism and why I'm still interested, I did want to switch gears and take a look at his overall stats. If you want to flash back to what he was producing last year, you could really talk yourself into this guy being the missing piece on a World Series championship. That just last year in 595 plate appearances, this was a guy who was hitting the lights out. 38 home runs, 80 RBIs. He finished 12th in MVP voting, was an all-star. That is real deal stuff. When you think about already this Phillies core, that could be the potential piece over the edge. But the issue being that this is in theory here. Now, the glove is something that's really appealing to me because, as I mentioned, I am pretty frustrated by the Phillies currently having to make this decision between going with the bat and going with the glove. And when talking about going with the glove, and I hate to nag on this guy because he is a player that I love, but Johan Rojas simply has not developed the bat at the rate in which the Phillies need. This season, just 3 home runs, 23 RBIs, a .266 on-base percentage, just 8 walks and 230 at-bats. And to directly contrast that with Luis Robert Jr. here, we're talking about more home runs, more RBIs, better on-base percentage in fewer at-bats. Straight up more hits in way fewer at-bats there. That's tough to swallow when comparing these two overall. Or I'm sorry, straight up more home runs there. Exact same on the RBIs. So when bringing that to the case, it's tough to talk yourself into it. And that's especially the case when there's another streaky outfielder playing just one slot over in Nick Castellanos. And on the season, 14 home runs, 50 RBIs, a .293 on-base percentage, 91 hits and 27 walks in his 384 at-bats. Now, granted, I think Cassie's been a little bit better than those raw stats indicate. Frankly, he's had stretches this year where he's looked really good, but that's the reality of Nick Castellanos, that when he's on a tear, when he's playing his best baseball, he's a really good, really solid player that you can count on, but you never know how long that is going to last. And the other part of it is when he's not in that mode, it looks really, really bad. I personally am very frustrated by his plate approach at times, the way that he chases things out of the zone, the way that he's never willing to work a count. He's ready to swing at that down and away slider or curveball or whatever is thrown out of the zone, that he just can't help himself with regards to that. Now, Robert's a little bit of a different story there, that I think, like, in general, you're kind of middling the pack for this being, your choice, the pure guy. That's kind of the biggest pushback for doing this, is this would be that one all-in move. I can't see the Phillies doing multiple big-time trades outside of this, and if you want to kind of accomplish other things, such as add a bullpen arm on top of an outfielder, it's probably not Luis Robert being your guy. But for this Phillies team, I have kind of talked myself into outfield being the biggest issue here, is I do think they need another reliable bat, and I just don't think it's sustainable to go through an entire playoff run having to continually make those choices between, do you want the bat that day or do you want the glove that day? Now, granted, I think for the most part, Rob Thomson has done a pretty nice job of balancing, that he does do a nice job of whether it's bringing in Rojas late in a game. We saw that last year in the playoffs a decent amount of time. Things like that are worth noting. But the bottom line is you got to have guys you can count on an every night basis. And if Luis Robert Jr. is healthy, he can be that caliber of talent. So ultimately, the fact that they are kind of hitting this cold spell, I do think is happening at the right time for this Phillies team. Because if Dave Dombrowski needed any call to action to get active and work those phones, it should be the product that you're seeing on the field lately. That this deep Phillies team all of a sudden doesn't quite have that look of the same depth. And again, I don't want to discount the bullpen because I'm a little nervous by what I'm seeing by Jose Alvarado. I don't know if I trust all these arms. While Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm have been terrific, it's beyond that I do have some concerns. Ryan Kirkring, I don't know. I'm getting a little skeptical of that as well. And while his stuff is nasty, it feels like we're throwing a lot of expectation on this kid who was just called up last year and really pitched very little before even going on that playoff run where they used him in some moments where they straight up shouldn't have. And I'm worried that we're due for the same fate this season. So ultimately, there's still a lot of work to be done on this Phillies roster. A great start would absolutely be going after Luis Robert Jr., but that could be a pretty penny to make that happen. Now, my last point being here is that just it's worth paying the pretty penny if yet that's what you think gets the job done. That you never know how many attempts at this World Series or with this core that you're going to get. And even though it feels like we're so young into this era, that can change very quickly, whether it be through an injury or another team getting ridiculously better or things like that, that there's going to be plenty of organizations. The Dodgers aren't going anywhere. The Braves are still going to be good, and they're going to be much better next year when they do get healthy. So the Phillies have to go for it when you think the window is open, and this is absolutely a year when that is the case. I get that you want to hold on to the prospects. You want to preserve for the future. But you know what? There's no guarantee that those guys are going to turn out better players than the ones that you know you're trading for now. At least we know exactly what Luis Robert Jr. is as an MLB player. And while that doesn't always work out, example A being Whit Merrifield this season, in general, I feel better about that gamble than I do about this prospect growing into a player that can keep this window open in the future. So we'll see what Dave Dombrowski ends up deciding to do. We have a lot more to break down on Phillies Digest, so make sure to keep it locked on the channel and drop a subscribe. Stay tuned. Me and my guy Luke Arcani will be back in action, getting everything squared away from a tech standpoint, so make sure you're staying locked in, dropping a like on this video, and subscribing to keep posted. I'll be talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.